Left of the box. You know how the conservatives are really against indoctrination, shouldn't indoctrinate the kids. That's horrible, especially not in schools. Schools shouldn't be allowed to indoctrinate children. No, bad. Tisk tisk. Especially when it comes towards queer issues. Definitely can't indoctrinate kids towards queer issues by just acknowledging they exist and all that sort of stuff. Alberta in particularly bad for that type of thing. Well, they're totally against indoctrination unless kids to learn Alberta is the most ethical producer of oil in the world in school. Yes. Donald Trump once said that you could get clean coal or something like that. Well, now there's going to be ethical oil production in Alberta. The tar sands. Tar sands. Going to be most ethical producer of oil in the world. That's what they're going to be taught. They're going to be taught this. Doesn't mean it makes it true. They're just going to be taught this, though. This is indoctrination. A curriculum framework that calls on teachers to promote Alberta's oil and gas industry to school children was quietly published months ago to the surprise of education experts and the opposition. So yeah, this is just, we're going to indoctrinate them really young into the oil and gas industry. The document was published online in April and includes a directive from Minister of Education Dimitrios Nikolaidi something to teach K through 12 students about Alberta's reputation as the most ethical producer of oil in the world and the importance of natural resources in enabling, sustaining Alberta's society and Albertans' quality of life. You see, this is part of the problem when you talk to people in Alberta is there are certain subjects. So like if you go down the States, Americans speak cool about a lot of things, but the instant you bring up guns, it's like somebody takes over them and they become totally obsessed with it and all that sort of stuff. Same with Zionists. They can be totally cool and progressive on every other issues, but as soon as you bring up the Palestinians, totally different person. It's the same in Alberta when it comes to oil and gas. They can be totally cool with everything else, but if you challenge that oil and gas, boom, different person that you're dealing with. And it has something to do with this and how incorporated, intertwined that they have made the culture of Alberta with oil and gas. Like you can't be one without the other almost. Like they have just made it part of their identity, of the Albertans' identity is to support oil and gas. And they've done a good job of it. Well, now they want to start even younger. Despite the framework being on the government website for 6 months, University of Alberta education professor Kent de Heyer told the IJF the development process was opaque, and few of his colleagues in the curriculum research community even knew about the minister's directive. I reached out to some of my colleagues, some of whom were leaders of what they would call expert group consultation on social studies, and they had never seen that, he said, of the oil and gas directive. No one is surprised that that's in theirs, Den Heyer said. I think they're more surprised that it would be put so boldly. NDP education critic Amanda Chapman was unaware of the document had been published until asked about it by the IJF. I would certainly suggest that a document like this be shared widely, said Chapman in an interview, adding, it's very concerning that the Alberta's Teacher Association, ATA, wasn't involved in any kind of consultation on the creation of this document. While oil and gas are a big part of Alberta's past, present, and future, Chapman said the curriculum should be more inclusive of renewable energy sources like geothermal, wind, and solar, which were not mentioned in the document. The Ministry of Education press secretary said the first version of the document was published in 2020. The most recent updates were published on April 26, and an email was sent to stakeholders, including ATA and the school boards, on the same day. The ministry didn't answer questions about the nature of the content or who developed it, but said the framework was intended to provide transparent guidelines to help parents, educators, and curriculum developers understand curriculum development in Alberta. Well, they failed on that, apparently. Jason Schilling, president of ATA, said teachers have consistently been excluded from curriculum development process in recent years. Traditionally, curriculums have been developed in collaboration with educators, Schilling said. But the way the government has approached curriculum development in the last several years, where they don't include teachers in the conversation or they don't listen to the experts, we have getting into problems with the curriculum. Energy-backed organization lobbying for oil and gas studies. The publication of the document follows reporting from the IJF last December that found a nonprofit organization called Safety in Schools, SIS, founded registered lobbyists asking the government to include oil and gas studies in junior high and high school curriculum. The lobbyists listed on the most recent registration, dated October 22nd, include several people with former ties to the UCP government. Shocking, not shocked. When it comes to, oil, gas, mining corporations, all that sort of stuff, Canada actually has a really bad reputation. Like, trying to sell this as ethical is trying to sell us like we're the good guys around the world. We're the peacekeepers. We're all of this. No, actually, we're like terrorists in many areas. Because extracting justice, the human rights impact of Canadian mining around the world. See, here's more natural resource extraction. And I've said this before, and people, I don't know if they believe me or they don't know why I know this. About 60% of the world's mining companies are Canadian. I know this because of my involvement with Amnesty International. Ooh, this is a problem. So when you see environmental disasters happening around the world when it comes to mining sites, when you hear about tribes that go missing, the murder, the mayhem, the extortion, the imprisonments, 60% of that is Canadian companies doing it. This CBC article, you can read it if you like. I've glanced over it and they're pretty much trying to make it seem like, well, the mining companies are just doing the best that they can and, they're not necessarily blah, blah, blah. Canada is home to an estimated 60% of the world's mining companies. They operate in all corners of the globe, including countries where mining activities have been linked to human rights violations. Up till now, making offending companies accountable in Canada is difficult. However, international human rights lawyer James Yap is fighting to change that. He and his colleagues pursued a lawsuit on behalf of dozens of, I'm not sure how to say that, plaintiffs who alleged they were forced to work at the Bisha gold mine, owned by a Canadian mining company. Again, words I don't know how to say. In the end, the settlement was reached for the workers. Canadian mining companies currently operate in all corners of the world. Regrettably, they've acquired a particularly bad reputation globally for causing serious human rights abuses. To make matters worse, in many of these places, it can be very hard, if not impossible, to hold a powerful multinational company accountable, so such companies escape justice. However, efforts have been gaining momentum in recent years to try and hold these companies accountable at home in Canadian courts, suing companies right here where their headquarters are for human rights abuses that take place overseas. These lawsuits are enormously challenging and difficult, not least due to procedural avoidance tactics by companies. When faced with the prospect of having their human rights records examined by impartial, independent Canadian courts, Canadian mining companies run like dogs from a vacuum cleaner. Canadian courts themselves have in the past been skeptical about hearing claims from foreign plaintiffs alleging human rights abuses against Canadian companies. However, despite a number of failed initial attempts, some of these claims have begun to have some modest success. So there was an ombudsperson that was supposed to be created by the Liberal government that would basically be the representative for plaintiffs and stuff. They announced that they were going to make one. So the Liberals announced that they were going to make an ombudsperson for mining corporations. They announced it. I'm not entirely sure if they followed through with it. And even then, it's like, how do you go to some of these very remote groups of people, English isn't their first language, and try to communicate to them that they have somebody that they could at least go to launch their complaints and all that sort of stuff. But this is Canada. And just here, from Amnesty International, Canadian mining firm accused of human rights abuses linked to evictions in the DRC. Allegations against the Vancouver-based firm Ivanhoe Mines include treatments of dozens of families evicted in 2017 to accommodate the development of the Kakula copper mine. In 2016, Camorra Copper Mine Company in which Ivanhoe owns 39.6% stake, identified 45 households across 21 square kilometers for relocation. The company promised to build 45 resettlement houses in the town of that with at its own expense. Hundreds of victims getting substandard housing to make way for mine expansion. Unfortunately, the living conditions the families encountered in 2017 after their eviction fell short of international human rights standards and contravened DRC law. Researchers observed the substitute houses in Kamoa built in Movdona are not equipped with running water, electricity, or connected to any sewage system, the report authors wrote. Many report that at the time of the eviction, resettlement houses were too small for their family sizes. So that's in the DRC. Then there was this one from Ecuador. Ecuadorian Indigenous women and rights defenders bring concerns to Canadian amid high-stakes trade negotiations. 4 women leaders in front lines, increasingly dangerous efforts to protect rights and the environment in Ecuador will visit Canada next week to speak out against intensifying trade talks amid expanding Canadian resource extraction projects, ecologically vulnerable people. Our territory, our rights, our lives are at stake in this trade deal, and it's being negotiated behind our backs and without our consent, says delegation member Zendaya, vice president of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador. Ecuador's largest indigenous body, we already know from experience the harm more Canadian mining will bring, which is why we're coming to Canada to urgently call on the government to reconsider a trade agreement that will make deteriorating human rights situation worse. At least 15 mining companies have active operations in Ecuador. Many are facing allegations of abuse, including conducting exploration activities in indigenous territories without consultation or collaborating with state security forces to violently suppress social protest. Those are just a couple examples. In other words, Canada doesn't have the reputation around the world that a lot of Canadians seem to think we have. We're not the good guys anymore. There used to be that rumor that, oh yeah, you can travel around the world and you slap a Canadian flag on your backpack and you're good and you get treated like royalty and you're like a celebrity, and Americans use Canadian flags all the time. If you go to these areas where there's these mining corporations, you might not want to mention you're Canadian. Just saying. The reputation there, not so good for very obvious reasons. Can't say I'm shocked anymore that we're violating human rights all around the world, considering the amount of human rights we're violating in this country and the genocides that this country is supporting. Once you pull apart the blinds and you really see Canada for what it is, this news is sad and it's heartbreaking, but it's no longer shocking. And I think that's why a lot of people don't want to know. They don't want to know what Canada really is, because anyone with any sort of empathy, compassion, would then feel obligated to speak out and maybe try to do something about it, or they might question their whole identity as Canadian. And, I don't have such an attachment to, I'm grateful to be Canadian, because I'm grateful of the privileges I've received by being born here, especially with this skin tone. But, the values this country actually instilled in me as a child around justice and peace and all that sort of stuff is what drives me to hold Canada accountable for the atrocities it's committing.